Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. Embarrassing royal deaths. This is Louis III, and this is his dad, Louis II, King of West Francia, also known as the Kingdom of the Franks. Hey Frank. Hey Frank. Louis II here is renowned for being a very peaceful and very loving ruler for his very short 2-year reign between the years of 877 and 879. And now, he's dead, which is even more peaceful. Now, Louis III is the king-to-be at the ripe old age of 16. But since his parents married in secret before he was slopped out, his claim to the throne is being questioned. Now, in order to keep things civil, Louis had struck a deal with his younger brother to rule together. And with that agreement, West Francia was split in two. Okay, this is my half, and there's yours. Fine by me. My side has the Xbox. Louis III got the north, and his brother, Carloman II, got the south. Together, the two brothers fought off any would-be usurpers from East Francia who contested their reign. Battles were fought for over a year with some back and forth, but ultimately ended in a loss, and a portion of their kingdom was ceded to the east. But while East Francia celebrated its victory, a distant threat loomed over the horizon. Those dang Vikings were showing up in 881 and began to pillage the village and plunder asunder. However, East Francia, still riding their high, managed to kick the Vikings' shit in. Not wanting to sail their ships home in shame, the Vikings instead tried their luck with West Francia. Bad move. They would soon learn that two kings were better than Vikings. Louis and Carloman went on the offensive and took the invaders by surprise. Together, the brother armies slaughtered the Vikings, cutting down around 9,000 men in the clash. This victory was absolutely huge for the two young monarchs, who were praised by both Western and Eastern Frankish kingdoms. Now keep in mind that both kings were teenagers, so the ego trip was insane. That being the case, Louis took to finding himself a queen, as to produce an heir and to cement his legacy. Louis decided to pursue love in 882 and ended up quite literally pursuing a potential partner. In a bout of hopefully consensual horseplay, the young maiden fled from the eager monarch on horseback to her father's house.
Why are you running?
Louis, very calmly hunting down his love interest, ended up completely conking his dome on the top of a low doorway. That's certainly one way to get head. And since he had yet to sow his seed, his younger brother was left to rule on his own. Well, he died 2 years later after being accidentally stabbed by his servant during a hunting trip. Bummer. Little Basil I was quite the inspirational success story. Born into a dirt-poor Armenian family in the Byzantine province of Macedonia way back in 811, baby Basil had quite the social ladder to climb. But such a challenge was deemed necessary as he was determined to dodge his destitute destiny. Too bad that he and his family were captured by Bulgarians when he was just 2. Luckily, Basil was able to escape his captors. It just took 23 years. He sought to live out his newfound freedom and fled to Constantinople, which is not yet Istanbul. Possessing incredible strength and an uncanny ability to roll 20s on any and all charisma checks, Basil made leaps and bounds up that social ladder. He began working as a lowly stable boy, got promoted to servant under a relative of the emperor, met a wealthy cougar noblewoman who just threw money at him, dabbled in sweaty, slippery wrestling, and then took on a gig as a bodyguard for Supreme Empire King Emperor guy Michael III. Now, you'd figure that being a bodyguard to the emperor would be a great place to coast until retirement, but Basil was just getting started. He managed to gain the utmost trust of the emperor, even being formally adopted as a son. And taking advantage of this, Emperor Mikey had been convinced by Basil that his own uncle was secretly plotting to take the throne, so he gave Basil permission to address the issue. He did. This false act of loyalty resulted in the emperor crowning Basil as co-emperor, which was not his best move. You see, Emperor Michael III wasn't very good in his decision-making, which is probably why the public didn't favor him all that much. Basil had one last obstacle in the way of the crown: his newly adoptive dad. But that's nothing a quick swipe of a sword can't fix. Basil dropped the "co" in his title and was now the full-fledged emperor of the Byzantine Empire in 867. Despite having 0 qualifications for the job, Basil's establishment of the Macedonian dynasty brought the Byzantine Empire into a golden age, with various military victories, large-scale construction, and significant cultural and legal reforms. Problem is, when you get into power through murder, you're always going to be looking over your shoulder for the next person trying to do the same thing to you. Now, I'm not going to question the logistics of it, but during a routine hunting hunting trip in 886, the now elderly Basil managed to get his belt stuck in a deer's antlers. Yeah, I don't know. The animal went wild, as animals tend to do, dragging Basil across the Windows XP default landscape for 16 whole miles. That's at least 2 kilometers. A servant had managed to cut the Emperor free, but the damage was done. Although somehow still alive, the Emperor sustained tremendous injury. The servant, still brandishing his iconic belt-cutting knife, was accused of attempted murder and was sentenced to death. Wait, what? Emperor Basil I died a bit later from his infected wounds. Old Edmund Ironside was King of England for a whole 7 months in 1016 after his rad dad Athelred II died under unknown circumstances. Poor Edmund rose to power at a pretty bad time. Those gosh damn Vikings were gaining a foothold in England, and they needed a stern talking to at the very least.
Not just any Vikings though, these were Danish Vikings, which were much more formidable, flaky, and flavorful.
The 26-year-old king fought back hard against the Viking invaders, throwing whatever English forces he could at them, and saw quite a few victories, granting the king the nickname Ironside for his resilience. But even though he won a few battles, he had yet to win the war. The final conflict, the Battle of Essendon, near modern-day Essex, ended in Danish victory, where there was much rejoicing and many crumbs. Following this English loss, a treaty was signed by King Edmund and Viking King Canute.
Canute, being a real canunt, agreed to allow Edmund to continue his reign, but only with the control of Wessex, the heart of Anglo-Saxon England. All English land north of the River Thames was now under Danish control. Now, there was a special stipulation that stated whichever king died first, the other shall inherit the whole country.
That sounds like great motivation for assassination plots. Lo and behold, just 1 month later in October of 1016, Edmund Ironside met with a terrible fate. While sitting on his second most important throne, an assailant was assigned to assassinate the king's ass. Yep, old Ironsides caught a blade between his cheeks when he was at his most vulnerable. According to some historical sources, an assassin hid under the king's private turlet, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Edmund, as planned, died of his wounds, granting King Canute full control over England, which he ruled for 2 decades. Being the youngest son of 4 to William the Conqueror, Henry I didn't even have a chance of becoming a Burger King, let alone any kind of respected monarch. When Daddy William logged off the server in 1087, the late king's possessions were divided as such. His eldest son, Robert, inherited Normandy and was made duke. His second son, Richard, got nothing. He was dead. From a hunting accident, no less. His third and favorite son, William, inherited the crown of England and was begrudgingly promoted to King William II overnight. I say begrudgingly because it is believed that William II would have preferred to inherit Normandy. Oh well. Finally, little Henry was given lots of money and a tiny bit of English countryside. But that was immediately yoinked by his now king brother, which never caused any internal resentment in the coming years. Now, some historians believe that King William 2.0 didn't care much for his new majestic role, and as a means of escape from his kingly duties, he frequently went on hunting trips. You can probably see where this is going. During one of these trips, William, who wasn't much of an adventurer, took an arrow in the chest. Now, since lungs aren't where arrows are usually stored, William quivered in pain as the arrow knocked the wind out of him, and he drew his last breath shortly after. Yeah, hunting trips are lethal to nobility. Of course, some historical speculations suggest that the friendly fire may not have been so friendly. It is possible that the fiasco was a plot concocted by Henry to seize the crown. After hearing of his older brother's demise through his own ear holes, Henry speed ran to the royal treasury and no-clipped to the crown to claim the throne for himself, which certainly didn't help dispel the rumors of foul play. Now, the public wasn't exactly against what had happened, as King William II was a bit of a dick. As the new head honcho, King Henry I immediately began a rollback on many of his late brother's brutal policies, replacing them with much more successful judicial and financial reforms. Being the most educated of the 4 brothers, Henry peacefully ruled England and progressed the kingdom during his reign. Sure, he also invaded Normandy and held his last brother prisoner for life, but that's beside the point. Henry eventually married a Scottish princess and had himself 2 legitimate children that he loved very much, and dozens of illegitimate little crotch goblins whom he didn't.
Daddy, I want a popsicle.
Now, of course, there has to be a little bit of conflict sprinkled in, so his son and only heir got caught up in the White Ship disaster of 1120, which was a titanic tragedy. The titular White Ship, a vessel transporting around 300 people, including many nobles, struck a big old boulder and sank in the English Channel. Only one soul survived, but it wasn't the prince, so who cares? This sent Henry into a depressive spiral, as many of his subjects refused to recognize his daughter as a rightful heir to the crown. A woman ruling? Ugh, gross, said the English. In his sad state, Henry cheered himself up the only way a king knows how, with a good old-fashioned hunting trip. But on this trip, Henry gorged himself on lamprey. You know, those weird little wiggly sucking teeth fish? Yeah, apparently those were a delicacy. Despite numerous warnings from his physician to cut it out, Henry continued to chew through the little suckers like candy. Your Majesty, that's a bit much, isn't it? King Henry I contracted food poisoning and died from the illness a week later in 1135 at the age of 66, bringing an end to the Norman dynasty. King Charles II was an asshole, which is why history remembers him as Charles the Bad. Having been born and raised in France and descending from a line of French rulers, Charles felt destined to be the big baguette in charge one day, and when his mother, who was the only daughter of former King Louis X of France, faded from existence, Charles received his inheritance, the paltry kingdom of Navarre, a pathetic spit of land in northern modern-day Spain. This sad excuse for a kingdom was an insult to his name, an insult he would never forget. Although now a king at the age of 17, Charles continued to spend his time in France, hoping to build enough influence to gain recognition for his claim to the crown. But he wasn't successful. He would spend the next several decades double-crossing, manipulating, and backstabbing his way through life, pitting England and France against each other during the 100 Years' War. He had deceived, murdered, and betrayed for the sake of gaining power. He eventually helped spark a revolution in France. No, not the French Revolution. That's not for a while. This uprising was the Jacquerie, a peasant rebellion in 1358 against French nobles. Charles led a suppressive force against the peasants to appear to be the savior of France, but everyone saw right through the ruse. After that publicity stunt, Charles lost almost all political support in France and had to turn to England for help. He ended up pleading with English King Dude Guy Edward III to invade the weakened France and divide the spoils between them, but King Edward was all, no. The king had zero trust for Charles and refused the offer, eventually making peace with France. For now. A few years later, Charles was back on his bullshit, throwing himself in wars and declaring loyalty to both sides in exchange for gaining land and power. He would just favor whichever side was winning. He did get involved in the Spanish Wars between 1365 and 1368, but faked his own kidnapping in order to avoid participating in battle. And that stunt was instantly recognized as cowardice, making Charles a laughingstock of Western Europe. Finally, in 1378, the annoying little fly that was Charlie II was finally swatted. His tiny kingdom was invaded by Spanish forces and promptly wiped out. Charles sought refuge in France and was forced to surrender in shame. Although he retained his crown, he had no power whatsoever. 9 years later in 1387, Charles the Bad fell ill and was pretty much immobile. His doctor prescribed that his body be wrapped in alcohol-soaked linen sheets, and these sheets were sewn around his body each night to promote any healing. Well, one night when finishing up her king sewing duties, a maid had no scissors to cut the last thread of the linen. There were no blades to be found that could finish the job. So, what do you think she did? Time's up. The correct answer was B. In a moment of completely terrible judgment, the young maid resorted to using an open flame candle to melt the thread off. Charles II, who wanted to be a French king so bad, was promptly flambéed in his bed as the maid panicked and fled. Henry II of France was a decent king between the years of 1547 up until his death in 1559. Nothing spectacular, but decent. He's remembered as an advocate for keeping the Catholic faith in France and suppressing them smelly Protestants. He had quite a few either burned at the stake for heresy or had their tongues cut out so they couldn't talk trash about Catholicism. Perhaps his bigger claim to fame, though, was his participation in ending the Italian Wars, which waged across 65 years. With the signing of the Treaty of Compilations, the deadly wars were finally at an end, and there was much rejoicing. One particular event of celebration was conducted by our subject, King Henry II. To commemorate the end of the wars, as well as his daughter's marriage to King Philip II of Spain, Henry held a jousting tournament. You know, that silly medieval sport where two men hold long wooden poles on horseback and just charge at each other trying to knock the other off? Yeah, I don't get it either, but hey, it's way more entertaining than baseball. Anyway, King Henry II held the tournament on June 30th, 1559 and took it upon himself to participate as a challenger. Perhaps the last bad decision of his life. Set against his own captain of the King's Guard, the two set off to consensually jab their long sticks into each other. With the ASMR pleasures of a wooden crunch, the captain's lance hit its target and shattered upon impact, as they're designed to do. Problem was, some of the splintered wood decided to nuzzle itself right into the king's eyeball for warmth.
Oh my god, okay, I'm sorry, you're fine, you're okay.
Royal surgeons raced to the king's aid, but were unable to treat the wound.
He's gonna be okay, right, Doc?
Tough to say. Problem seems to be this big old piece of wood here. I highly recommend he rest up for a few days and we'll see what happens.
Aren't you gonna remove the wood?
I'm sorry, I was unaware that you were the royal surgeon. The medics failed to properly treat the king's wounds, which only got worse over the next few days, leading to severe infection. I may have been wrong. King Henry II splintered off from this world on June 10th, 1559. History's good as boys. Being a good boy is not limited to any one animal. It could be a dog, a cat, a bat, a rat, or even your 4-year-old little cousin when he isn't kicking your shins. That being said, our first good boy is Gustav. Ever since he was just a little embryo wriggling in his egg, he wanted to serve his country. So when it was time to leave the nest, he decided to enlist in the military, despite parental pressures not to. After some intense training with his new human counterpart, Frederick Jackson of Cosham, Gustav earned his wings and was officially made a service pigeon for the British Royal Air Force during World War II. So which one is yours? Oh, that handsome little pigeon right in the middle there. Ugh, pervert. Early in his career, Gustav was part of the Belgian resistance, carrying messages out of German-occupied Belgium. But since the Germans had previously occupied Belgium for 4 years during World War I, the Belgians knew the drill. Oh honey, it looks like the Germans are back. I'll go get the mallet. After a long, successful run of sending messages in and out of Belgium, Gustav would be assigned his most important role yet. On June 6, 1944, Gustav was aboard an Allied landing ship headed towards the beaches of Normandy. If you know your history, you're familiar with that date being D-Day, when Allied forces decided to penetrate a very German France. Unfortunately, our feathered friend was not well versed in combat, so he was tasked with delivering critical news back to the UK about the mission. Gustav held the message in his little footsie and took wing, 150 whole miles against a 30-mile-an-hour headwind. Bro was flapping. After just over 5 hours of continuous flight, the message was received, being the first official update on D-Day's mission status since the fleet went radio silent to avoid detection. For his service, Gustav was given a Dickin. Yeah, a Dickin Medal for his bravery, which is the animal equivalent of the British Victoria Cross or the US Medal of Honor. Gustav eventually retired from service and lived out the rest of his days with his best friend and former trainer, Fred Jackson. He went to the great nest in the sky as a war hero and an official good boy. By the end of the war, a total of 32 carrier pigeons were awarded a Dickin Medal. For instance, the comically but fashionably named William of Orange, who saved over 2,000 soldiers with a single message carried over 250 miles in just over 4 hours. 10 years after his retirement, he was reportedly a, quote, grandfather of many outstanding racing pigeons. Our next good boy was actually a good girl with a badass name. Meet Sergeant Reckless, a United States Mongolian warhorse during the Korean War. And no, that's not just a funny title like calling a rabbit Captain Puffers. Reckless actually held the rank of Staff Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. This absolute tank of a warhorse was purchased in 1952 off of a stable boy in Seoul, South Korea for 250 smackers. Apparently, the young fragile boy needed money to buy an artificial leg for his apparently even more fragile sister. Always some kind of Disney Pixar tragic backstory, isn't it? Reckless was taken in by the United States Marine Corps and trained to be a pack horse for a regiment specializing in anti-tank armaments. Not surprisingly, the platoon took to her very quickly, and she was immediately one of the gang, allowed to roam freely amongst the camp and poke her head in around the tents. Do you mind?
She was known to eat nearly anything that was available. Chocolate, eggs, beer, the Marines' treasured supply of delicious and nutritious crayons. She even once ate a small pile of poker chips, if you could believe that. Alright fellas, I'm all in. Oh, god damn it, I fold. Being a pack horse and all, Reckless's main duty was to carry supplies and ammunition to the battlefront, but she even managed to carry wounded off of the field to safety. And she was a pretty smart girl, learning her supply routes after only a few trips, unlike me who still uses the GPS to make sure I take the same exit that I've taken 50 times before.
Recalculating. Idiot.
But Reckless's claim to fame came in March of 1953 during the Battle for Outpost Vegas. In a single day, this heroic equine managed to make 51 resupply trips to the front lines solo. No handler needed. Across those trips, she totaled over 9,000 pounds of ammunition over 35 miles of travel. She is the definition of understanding the assignment. She did sustain 2 minor wounds in the battle, but was promoted to corporal shortly after the battle had ended, with another promotion to sergeant after the entire Korean War ended. For her services, she was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, a Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal, and was included in her unit's Presidential Unit Citations, among other military honors. Yeah, nothing could stop this anti-tank warhorse. Next up, Simon. Look at this handsome little man. Now, before you comment, no, this isn't Unsinkable Sam. This is Simon. How do I know? Well, his tag is for the HMS Amethyst, which is the ship that Simon served on, but I'll get to that in a bit. Just know that most of, if not all, stories of Unsinkable Sam mistakenly use Simon's picture instead, with his tag cropped out. It's quite the scandal, and I won't stand for it. Anyway, in 1948, on a cold Chinese morning in China, little Simon was doing cat things in a dockyard in Hong Kong. He was found by a 17-year-old naval seaman named George Hickenbottom, who was a crew member of the locally docked British frigate, the HMS Amethyst. But little Simon was not in such good condition. He was estimated to be about a year old at this point and was pretty malnourished. I'm going to keep you and love you forever. Meow. And so, Simon was smuggled onto the ship. However, due to small obvious signs of cat activity, Simon was almost immediately discovered, but was instantly adored by the crew. Because, I mean, come on. How could you not? Look at him. It ended up being a solid deal as Simon would hunt rats aboard the vessel, providing him a reliable source of food and ridding the crew of pests. Everything seemed well and good on a mission up the Yangtze River until the incident. Halfway up the river, the Amethyst came under fire from a group of Chinese People's Liberation Army field guns. The little bastards were absolutely relentless. The round struck the captain's quarters where Simon was stationed. He sustained serious wounds but was rushed to the medical bay for treatment. His burns were tended to and shrapnel was removed, but he was not expected to survive. But you should never doubt Simon. The fearless little feline ended up making a full recovery and went straight back to work because them rats got too comfy with him being out of commission for a bit. Simon's KC skyrocketed, along with the crew's morale. Mate's the captain, he's fucking dead. Don't ruin this for us. After the incident, Simon became an instant celebrity, gaining publicity all over the world. For his services, he was granted the Dickon Medal, a Blue Cross Medal, and the Amethyst Campaign Medal. He was even given the rank of Able Sea Cat for his exceptional rat hunting abilities. Little Simon was a huge star. When he was finally able to move to his new home in England, Simon was required to be placed in quarantine per regulations. It was here that Simon tragically contracted a virus and was granted 50% opacity on November 28, 1949 at just 2 years of age. The entire Amethyst crew and hundreds of other adoring fans attended his funeral in the Ilford Animal Cemetery in East London, where he loafs bonily to this day. Moving on, we have this prestigious primate right here, Corporal Jackie the Baboon. His story begins in the 1910s in South Africa when he was found roaming around a farm. The owner, Albert Marr, took Jackie in as a pet because why not have a pet baboon? Over the next few years, the two grew close and were like family, but of course, the world decided to slam a wedge into the family as well as millions of other families around the globe when World War I broke out. Albert was drafted into the South African Army in 1915 but refused to leave Jackie at home, to which Albert's commanding officers were like, Alright, the baboon can come. And so, Jackie was made the mascot for the 3rd South African Infantry Regiment, complete with his own little uniform with hat, rations, and his own little paybook. To no surprise, he was adored by the regiment. In true soldier fashion, Jackie would salute his superior officers, march with the regiment, eat with his own fork and knife, and would even light other soldiers' cigarettes. He was such a good boy. Outside of just entertainment and morale, Jackie proved to be a valuable asset to the team. His heightened senses allowed him to be alerted to incoming attacks well before human soldiers would be able to. The war did end up taking Jackie and Albert far from home, with one of their first major combat encounters being the Battle of the Somme in 1916 France. Both Jackie and Albert survived quite a few high casualty battles across their tour. While serving in Egypt, Albert was shot in the shoulder, and Jackie stayed with him and tended to his wounds while awaiting medical aid. Jackie, I don't know if I'm gonna make it, buddy. Nonsense, Albert. Despite both him and Albert sustaining wounds, they both survived the war. Jackie was awarded a Medal of Valor for his bravery and was promoted to corporal. Both he and Albert returned home to South Africa. Although Jackie managed to survive years under fire during the war, he ultimately perished in a fire in 1921 at home. But he was still a good boy. Now, unless you're a Hollywood elite, you don't often want to become friends with a natural predator. But the Polish military had a different idea in 1942 during a little-known event called World War II. A Syrian brown bear cub was adopted and given to the 22nd Artillery Supply Company of the Polish military. The troops instantly loved the bear because what else was there to do? They ended up naming him Wojciech, which loosely translates to Happy Warrior because he was a happy boy indeed. The troops raised the cub by feeding it condensed milk from a vodka bottle and then eventually various fruits and syrups. The bear grew attached to the soldiers, copying their every move. When the soldiers slept, he slept. When it was time for a nice morning coffee and cigarette, Wojciech would drink coffee and eat a cigarette. When being saluted, Wojciech would salute back. He was an ideal and loyal companion, despite being a giant fucking bear. After the company was assigned to fight alongside the British during the Italian campaign, the British displayed their signature racism against bears, forbidding Wojciech from being transported with the troops since he wasn't a soldier. So, as a big Pierre Doche to the Brits, Wojciech was immediately enlisted as a private into the Polish military. Oh, so you can have pigeons but you draw the line at bears? Whatever. Now officially being part of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, his main job was to transport crates of ammunition to troops, which he was very successful at doing. He would lift large crates of artillery shells onto trucks, a job that normally required the strength of 4 men. It was noted that he never dropped a single crate, lest he obliterated his entire fan base and you wouldn't be hearing much about him today, other than that one idiot bear who dropped a bomb and killed everyone. For his work, he was promoted to corporal and became the official symbol of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. Once World War II peacefully concluded, Wojciech spent the rest of his days in the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland, where he would be frequently visited by his military pals. Adoring fans would often toss cigarettes for Wojciech to munch on as a treat. He kicked the honeypot 16 years later at the age of 21. At ease, soldier. Although he never received any medals for his service, Wojciech was beloved by many across Europe and is immortalized with several statues across Poland, the UK, and even Italy. Secret spy gadgets, huh? You know all about the Cold War, right? It was that time between the 1940s and 1980s where the United States of America and the United States of Soviet Russia, or whatever it stood for, decided to really duke it out on whose economic system was superior for worldwide domination. Capitalism or communism? But since the USSR is nowhere to be found on a modern map and over 300 versions of Monopoly are available on the market, it's pretty clear who won. Now, it was called the Cold War because neither superpower actually fought each other directly. Instead, everything was just one big wiener measuring competition, from who could build better weapons to who could make more countries kill each other. But sometimes, sneaky measures were taken to get the upper hand, and that's where spies came in. Highly trained agents designed to infiltrate enemy lines and carefully yoink critical information from the other side, among other fruitful missions. But they needed to be creative in their method of extracting information to avoid getting caught. Good spies don't get caught. Perhaps the most common tool in a spy's arsenal was the hidden camera. In order to follow the cardinal rule of pics or it didn't happen, these discreet little lenses were used to secretly take pictures of sensitive documents or sensitive people without being too obvious. Eto na sumi secret ni documento. Really?
you flip that over, please?
Yes, of course.
The clever cameras were carefully concealed in copious quantities of clothes and components like coats, coins, and cleavage. Perhaps one of the most effective types was the microdot camera, a tiny camera used to make even tinier pictures. About the size of a small coin, these little wonders captured images of full-size sensitive documents, but thanks to a special lens and some fancy physics, the resulting image would be scaled down to just a dot. A microdot, if you will. These microdots measured about a millimeter in length and could easily be snuck back into headquarters where they could be magnified and properly read. Gotcha. But taking pictures of a few confidential documents was small-time work. Sometimes you need to think bigger, like entire secret bases bigger. So in order to get a bird's-eye view on the landscape, you had to do just that. That's where the employment and deployment of pigeon cameras came in. Specially trained pigeons that had big old cameras strapped to their chests and sent flying across areas where the camera could reveal potential bases and strategic locations. But if seeing wasn't an option, then listening was an acceptable alternative. It was a common tactic for intelligence operations to bug a room, meaning that multiple listening devices would be planted around said room or on an agent. But some smartass took the term bug a little too literal, which is how the dragonfly insectothopter became reality. But why oh why the dragonfly? Well, because a regular fly is too small and swattable, and while a prototype for a bumblebee was developed, it was noted that real bees are too erratic when they fly. And so if a couple of savvy sleuths noticed a bumblebee just kind of hovering around in the air, it was a telltale sign that your business was being recorded. Dragonflies, though, can kind of just hover for a while, and so it's a little less suspicious. Plus, their long, slender bodies were a perfect shape to house the mechanics necessary to be a microphone with wings. I'm sorry, how many missiles did you say in Cuba? Is there a lake nearby or something? But if you had insectophobia, then what could be the next best thing? This thing. The Thing. This vaguely named piece of woodwork was a hand-carved US Great Seal gifted by the Soviet Union to a US ambassador a few weeks before World War II ended. I guess the USSR wanted to get an early jump on the whole spying thing. It was hung up in the ambassador's private study as a way to passively listen in on conversations. But how? Hidden in the wood carving was an antenna that, although mechanically simple, was pretty impressive technology. Invented by Leon Tierman, who is famous for also inventing the theremin, that weird frequency instrument that goes all. This listening device had no power source or wires, rendering it virtually undetectable. No way. Instead, a remote radio frequency would turn on the device, allowing the Soviets to actively listen in whenever those perverts pleased. Classified as a resonant cavity microphone, it was basically a tiny diaphragm that would vibrate from sound waves of people yapping. Those vibrations are then transformed into a signal which was sent back to the Soviets. The device was so well hidden that it actually wasn't found until 7 years later. Yo Dave, check this out, the Soviets put a freaking microphone in the seal.
Those commie bastards were listening this whole time?
I'm gonna rip it out.
No, wait. I have an idea. Time to listen in on the Americans. I hate my job.
Now you might be thinking, man, microphones and cameras? That shit's lame on God for real, or whatever the flip y'all say today. Well, if I were mean, this is where I would put something loud to blow out your eardrums in retaliation. But I'm not gonna do that. Next up in the spy arsenal, sounds like an idea that someone just pulled out of their ass. You ever see like a Swiss Army knife with its super convenient and practical tools like knives and saws and screwdrivers? Now imagine if you got the sudden urge to just ram that thing up your anatomical back pocket for later retrieval in a pinch. Well, you're in luck I guess, because that's what the rectal toolkit is for. Hey, at least it's better than a glass jar. Used mainly by very brave CIA agents at the height of the Cold War, this toolkit was equipped with all the aforementioned tools needed to get yourself out of a shitty situation, all conveniently contained in a ribbed for your pleasure capsule. Although convenient, there might be a few obvious tells of the supportive suppository. Alright, the guards are distracted. Let's move out. I'm right behind you. Oh geez. Sometimes a spy needs a quick getaway. Luckily, there are plenty of opportunities at your disposal. Perhaps a spy's best offense was a solid defense of remaining anonymous and indiscernible amongst a crowd. Many spies were artists in terms of changing disguises on the fly to get any would-be pursuers off their trail. But if changing clothes didn't do the trick, then the 5-second mask would.
This was a latex mask developed for quick identity theft on the go. In just 5 seconds, as the name implies, one could assume an entirely new appearance from the shoulders up, complete with facial hair and a hairline that screams, "I've got a mortgage, an unsatisfied wife, and 3 ungrateful brats at home." No enemy agents would suspect a thing, but they would certainly be sympathetic towards your new fake backstory, maybe even empathetic. Godspeed, soldier. But if you're still being tailed and need a quick diversion, it might be time to deploy the Jack-in-the-Box. Constructed from a hopefully unused sex doll, this inflatable fellow served as a decoy for a vehicular getaway. When getting Ubered away from a mission, you may get a feeling that you're being followed and need to quickly vamoose.
The enemy's coming in your behind. Do a barrel roll.
Assuming your driver knows the assignment and you tipped him well, he can quickly turn a corner while you delicately tuck and roll to safety. The Jack-in-the-Box is then quickly inflated where you were sitting, convincing your assailants that you didn't just take yourself out by slamming your dome into a street lamp at 35 miles an hour. However, there may be a chance where the jig is up and you get got. No need to worry though, they can't extract information from you if you're completely dead. You know that famous Pirates of the Caribbean quote,
"Dead guys don't say things much."
The thing is, it's very unpatriotic to give up confidential information to an enemy entity. Traitors even. So in order to not disgrace your home country that put you in this dangerous pickle in the first place, you have one last resort. A lethal dose of cyanide hidden in your false tooth. Just gnaw on that sucker like one of grandma's old strawberry candies to earn your one-way ticket to Sleepy Bye Junction. Now, if you've got the stones for it and you want to fight back, that's where the real fun stuff begins, with an arsenal of concealed weapons at your disposal. This first one really packs a punch. This is the Sedgley OSS 38 single-shot glove pistol, a relatively simple weapon capable of delivering a very simple death. See, with a gun, you pull a trigger and your point comes across pretty quickly. With a glove gun, you get to punch them in the face while you're at it. It's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, but it's killing one face with a bullet and a fist. So when you're in a bout of fisticuffs and your opponent insists you give him your best shot, boy will he be surprised. For you ladies out there looking to discreetly apply a nice shade of red to yourself and a target, there's the lipstick pistol, also referred to as the Kiss of Death. This little guy was a single-shot 4.5mm pistol hidden in a lipstick holder used by the KGB. They were the Soviet equivalent of the CIA. Easily disguised as a harmless accessory in a handbag, this weapon could be concealed next to your concealer and make up the foundation of your arsenal. I would imagine such an encounter would go like this. Oh wow, what a lovely shade. What color is that? It's called You're Gonna. You're gonna? Yeah, you're gonna die. You're gonna die. Ooh, how exotic sounding.
How does it look?
Ugh, okay, maybe such tactics are a little bit messy. Let's shoot for something more surreptitious, like poison. Poison's great when you're not on the receiving end of it. If you don't want the hassle of dirty work to rain on your parade, you can opt for the Bulgarian umbrella. This clever contraption looks like a typical umbrella, but it isn't. Obviously. This umbrella Ella actually contains a pneumatic element which, when triggered, will launch a poison dart towards any target you desire. The poison of choice was ricin, a potent chemical which, when injected, will cause massive internal bleeding and organ failure, guaranteed to put a damper on anyone's day. The Bulgarian umbrella is referred to as such because the most famous use of the device was in 1978 when a KGB agent assassinated a Bulgarian enemy of the state right in the middle of the streets of London.
Is someone there?
I suppose if you really want to take aim at who you're pumping full of poison, then equip yourself with the ominously named heart attack gun. Revealed to the general public in 1975, this firearm was, as the name implies, capable of delivering one free heart attack by means of a lethal injection of shellfish toxin right into the bloodstream. The toxin was discovered by one Miss Mary Embry of the CIA. Her discovery also played a major role in Project MK Naomi, a secret US program aimed at developing biological weapons during the Cold War and a successor to the infamous Project MK Ultra. The poison was frozen into a compact dart and fired at a high speed. Once it penetrated the target, it would melt and be absorbed into the body. The toxin would spread and mimic the symptoms of an innocent heart attack. Only a tiny red dot was the evidence that anything malicious had even happened. Hey guys, today we're gonna see how some small mistakes in history led to some pretty big consequences. So strap in with your favorite toothpaste and orange juice, cause here we go. King of Scots Alexander III was revered by his subjects as a kind and noble king, so he was a pretty cool guy. He put an end to an ongoing war with Norway with the signing of the Treaty of Perth. This stopped the invading Vikings from doing their stereotypical graping and pillaging and made them frig off back to Norway. The treaty also let Scotland gain possession of the Western Isles and the Isle of Man. With all this land expansion going on, as well as increased exports and cash flow, Scotland entered a bit of a golden age. Everything was pretty good until it wasn't. After all, no story is complete without some good old-fashioned character development from a Disney Pixar family tragedy. In the mid-1280s, King Alexander's wife, Queen Margaret, bit the dust, which was pretty devastating since they were married since childhood. Well, at least he had his own children to care for. Except for the fact that they all died too. Little Margaret Jr., who hilariously became Queen of Norway, expired at the age of 22 while pooping out her only child, a daughter named Margaret. We'll get to her later. Alex Jr. died on his 20th birthday at the age of 20. Don't know how he died either, sources just say he just died. The youngest child, David, also kicked an uneventful bucket at age 19. With his family tree essentially trimmed down to the trunk, Alex was desperate to generate new successors, so he married a French countess, Yolande of Dreux. She moved in with the king, but like in a different town for some reason. Well, one night the king was acting pretty eager to perform, so he set out to do the deed of sowing his seed, and nothing was going to block his urge to splurge. Nope, not even that. Despite pleads and warnings from bro-code breaking advisors, the king set out to get his dunk sunked. He had a few of his servants accompany him as guides, and they made it to the queen, but the king, on the other hand, got separated in the harsh storm and was subsequently yeeted off of his horse over a cliff where he was found the next morning, dead as a doornail. With no other heir, it was Margaret Jr.'s time to shine. But since she was only 3 years old and with the attention span of a goldfish, the political landscape of Scotland fell into ruin, ending the short-lived golden age, all because the king needed to slam some sweet queen skush. As I'm sure you know, the luxurious ocean liner Titanic was the ship of dreams that ended up becoming a complete nightmare. The ship died in 1912 after Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet distracted the two lookouts in the crow's nest from observing the giant fucking iceberg floating several hundred feet in front of them. Despite the crew's best efforts, the ship collided with the iceberg and got flushed into the North Atlantic a few hours later. Joking aside, it is believed that the entire disaster could have been prevented, or at least significantly reduced, if it weren't for one key mistake: an actual missing key. Lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were tasked with the important task of making sure that no icebergs were in the ship's path. In the crow's nest, the two men were equipped with a warning bell and a telephone to alert crew of any potential dangers in the chilled waters ahead. They also had one more tool: a pair of binoculars which were secured in a box. A locked box with a missing key. Apparently, this key was accidentally taken off of the ship before it set sail by a second officer, David Blair. What's this here in my pocket? Huh. I'm sure that's not a big deal. With no binoculars, the lookouts had to rely on eyesight alone. And that wouldn't be so terrible if it weren't for the fact that the night was extremely dark, cold, and calm, making it very hard to see icebergs. Luckily, there were almost none all night. Almost. Both lookouts miraculously survived the sinking and, when interviewed, agreed that if they had binoculars, they could have seen the iceberg and reacted more quickly, avoiding the unnecessary loss of over 1,500 lives, but dooming James Cameron's film career. The key, donated to the British Sailor Society by Officer Blair's daughter, was eventually sold at auction for 90,000 British pounds. If you've ever dealt with the trouble of remembering how many tablespoons are in a gallon, or that there's 660 feet in a furlong, you probably long for the ease of the metric system. Being an American myself, I'm genetically inclined to detest the anti-freedom units, but getting an engineering degree made me appreciate the simplicity of the metric system. I mean, guys, it's really great. Everything is just a multiplicative of 10. Kilogram, it's 1,000 grams. A meter, it's 100 centimeters. Like, wow, amazing. Anyway, that convenience was stolen from us by a band of scallywag pirates during America's infancy. In 1793, Secretary of State Thomas Mother Effin Jefferson recognized that the United States needed to standardize their units of measure as multiple systems were being used, making commercial trading a logistical nightmare. Luckily, the French of all people had an answer. Scientist Joseph Dombey was dispatched to the United States with a special gift: a carefully crafted copper cylinder which would serve as the revolutionary new standard in weight measurement. the kilogram. Just one component of France's newly developing metric system. While sailing to the States with his cylinder in one hand and the kilogram in the other, Dombey's ship was blown off course by a storm. Now headed for the 1700s Caribbean. British pirates at the time usually attacked non-British ships to impede their trade, and unfortunately Dombey was one of those victims. He was held hostage for ransom but died in captivity. Dombey's death meant that Jefferson never got the metric standard, meaning it was never adopted. So the United States stuck with the English units as their standard. While it is possible that we could all be measuring our all-beef francs using centimeters, it's doubtful, as multiple attempts over the years to implement the metric system have been defeated at the greasy hand of American pride. Ethiopia and Italy typically aren't two countries that you would hear about in the same sentence, but during the late 1800s when Africa was getting absolutely reamed by colonization, Italy had its sights set on some potential land expansion candidates, one of them being, you guessed it, Eritrea, Ethiopia's northern neighbor. This led to a bit of an unofficial scuffle called the Italo-Ethiopian War of 1887, which lasted for 2 years and ended with Italy formally occupying Eritrea and the signing of the Treaty of Wuchal. Among other rules, the treaty basically stated that peace was to remain between Italy and Ethiopia. However, one article had two different meanings between languages. In Italian, the article stated that Ethiopia must act through Italy if they wish to do business with other governments. The Amharic or Ethiopian version stated that Ethiopia can act through Italy for external business, which suggested that it wasn't mandatory. Very different things. The treaty was nonetheless signed and eventually the two countries clashed again. Italy claimed that it had full control over Ethiopia's external affairs, but Ethiopia claimed, "Nuh-uh, dude." Italy then invaded Ethiopia in 1895, starting the official First Italo-Ethiopian War. With Italy's army of 44,000 against Ethiopia's 125,000, the Italians ended up getting their spaghetti-eating teeth kicked in, securing Ethiopia's independence in 1896. Until Italy invaded again in 1935. Italy won that time. All in all, around 25,000 lives were lost during the First Italo-Ethiopian War, all because Italy decided to skip its daily Duolingo sessions. When you're a power-hungry dictator to millions of food-hungry citizens, your people will probably hate you, which is something that Joseph Stalin was shocked to find out when leading the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death in 1953. Although he came into power with some strong initial support, it quickly dried up as his first few years sucked eggs. He went balls deep into national industrialization and uprooted the agricultural system. No food means famine, and famine means people die. So, people died. Millions of them. Stalin was now officially an asshole, and assholes need to be wiped clean. His political rivals demanded his removal, prompting Stalin to switch to defense mode. In doing so, he began stringent investigations of the government for anyone who might even toy with the idea of questioning his policies. Yes, hello, I have question. No one was safe. During what came to be known as the Great Purge between 1936 and 1938, Stalin expanded his investigations to anyone he deemed a threat to the Soviet Union. By the end, there were over 700,000 documented executions of workers, artists, teachers, whoever, while in reality it is estimated to be about 1.2 million. Even his own Red Army saw 37,000 soldiers executed or sentenced to labor camps. And these weren't just lowly foot soldiers either, I'm talking like commanders and generals, his top guys. Stalin was absolutely unhinged, with his paranoia destroying his mental and physical health. He ended up surviving a severe heart attack and a stroke in 1945, with his health never fully recovering. On the night of February 28, 1953, Stalin was chilling with some bros, watching movies and having dinner. After a long night of joking and smooches, Stalin retired to his private quarters, specifically instructing not to be disturbed until he woke up the next morning. Well, the next morning came and nothing. Afternoon, nothing. Remember that even his closest friends were terrified of defying him lest they be sent to the gulag. Night came. Still nothing. And by now, they're pretty worried. It wasn't until 11 p.m. that a housekeeper dared to check on Stalin. He was found on the ground unconscious and unresponsive. Still terrified to call the doctor, it took another 8 hours for Stalin to receive medical attention. With an extremely high blood pressure of 190/110, Stalin had suffered another intense stroke. He received around-the-clock care for 3 days before he ultimately despawned on March 5th, 1953. Had he been kinder to his bros and not such a complete butthole, he may have been treated sooner and survived his ailment, even if it was short-lived. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed in 1991.
Dumbest weapons in history. War between humans is bad enough, so it gets rather depressing when innocent animals are dragged into the mix. But honestly, animals have been used in warfare for ages. War elephants, attack dogs, carrier pigeons, bat bombs. Wait, bat bombs? Yep, bat bombs. Just one letter off from being a very nice, relaxing evening, the bat bomb is anything but. Dubbed Project X-Ray, the bat bomb was an experimental weapon developed by the United States for use against the Japanese in World War II. Initially thought up by a friggin' dental surgeon, no less, the bomb would work like this. You stuff a bunch of angry bats into a little canister. Mexican free-tailed bats to be specific. Why? Well, cause they're small and cute, that's why. But they're also very fast, which is probably way more conducive to the task at hand. These flappy boys can soar through the air at around 100 miles per hour. Okay, fast bats. Cool, got it. But how are they bombs? Glad you asked. There were actually little bombs just straight up strapped to their chests, of course. Each bat was equipped with a tiny 1-ounce incendiary device, which was just a small pouch of napalm that would detonate after a timed delay. So now you have your explosives. Just cram them all into a small capsule and find a target. Easy enough, right? Once the bat bomb was dropped over an intended target, a parachute would deploy, opening the bombshell and releasing over 1,000 bats. In theory, the bats would scatter across the landscape and look for places to roost and go sleepy by. Anywhere that a bat could squeeze into and honk some me-me-me's was a suitable target. Since the bats would likely spread over a wide range to multiple targets in the area, they would prove to be very effective little terrorists, as small fires would spring up across the city and be difficult to contain. So how did it do? Well, during a test run in a US airfield, hundreds of armed bats were accidentally released and took refuge next to, for perfect comedic effect, a giant friggin' fuel tank. Don't move. Though effective, Project X-Ray was cancelled because World War II ended before testing was fully complete. Maybe next time, fellas. Nuclear bombs dropped from the sky are pretty cool, but how about a bomb that you could bury in the ground waiting for victims to roll over it? Like a landmine? Yes, like a landmine, but a bigger, better one. Enter the Blue Peacock nuclear mine. Developed by the British in the 1950s, the goal of this bomb was to stop potentially invading Soviet forces from taking over recently war-torn Germany. You know, if they decided to do that sort of thing.
Oi, bruv, you want Germany? Well, come on then.
Oh, hang on a tick. Oh, alright. Yeah, come on then. It was a great exit strategy to render the area completely useless, as everything was now reduced to atoms and irradiated. If I can't have it, no one can, said the British. So to level a whole city, these things had to be massive, and they were. Each bomb weighed around 16,000 pounds. The bomb would lie in wait underground to be detonated remotely if any invasion took place. The problem with a bomb being underground and unattended is that a lot can go wrong. Detonation mechanisms could fail and refuse to detonate, or it could detonate prematurely like a bad date night. One particular concern was the preservation of the detonation mechanisms during the cold winter when the ground froze over. So what would be a suitable way to prevent a bomb from freezing? Well, you probably want some heat, but from what? Heated water? Not practical. Electric heat? Too dangerous. Wait, I've got it. Body heat. No, Ron, get off the bomb and put your clothes back on. Oh. I'm talking body heat from this. Yup, it was proposed that live chickens would be stuffed into the bombs to provide enough body heat to maintain operation during cold spells. They would be given a supply of food and water as they enjoyed their stay in the 5-star volatile vessel. In the end, only 2 of the 10 proposed bombs were ever built, but neither were ever detonated, and the project was scrapped after a few years of development.
The Imperial Russian Navy was looking to revolutionize naval warfare in the 1870s. The basic premise is that the bigger the guns, the better the Navy. Well, to have bigger guns, you need bigger ships, but when you build bigger ships, they could probably hold bigger guns. But then why not just build even bigger ships to hold even bigger guns? Well, it's not that simple. By design, ships are rather narrow, leaving weight distribution pretty limited in a geometric sense. So why not widen the ship to be more, round? Surely that would solve the problem. No, that would just be a dumb design. But Imperial Russia didn't think so, and thus in 1874, many Russian rubles were put towards developing and building
the Novgorod.
This absolute unit of a warship measured 101 feet in diameter and was protected with 12 inches of plated armor. Equipped with two 11-inch cannons, it was basically a fully strapped lily pad. Any good warship is fast with reliable steering. Was the Novgorod? Nope. By contrast, it was painfully slow and hard to steer. At top speed, the circular ship cut through the waves at a staggering 7.5 miles per hour. Slightly slower than the average male running speed, according to Google. And funny enough, with its circular design, recoil from cannon fire would often cause the ship to unintentionally rotate, slowing down any formidable suppressing fire in a warfare setting while the ship resets position. Not that it mattered too much because each cannon took 10 minutes to reload between shots. Despite her shortcomings, she participated in the Russo-Turkish War of 1877, but was ultimately used for shoreline defense instead of active naval warfare. Her career was surprisingly long, lasting 29 years before being decommissioned and eventually sold for scrap. Even today, the Novgorod is regarded as one of the worst naval ships ever designed. The ship had many flaws, sure, but experimentation is how we improve as people. Or at least that's what they tell us. Ever have an annoying bug buzz in and out in front of your face, so you try to get rid of it by blowing some air at it? Yeah, not very effective, is it? And neither was the wind cannon. This 90-degree ass silly cylinder was almost one of the Nazis' Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons. Almost. It was a 3-foot diameter, 35-foot long cast iron cannon, and it worked like this. A bunch of hydrogen and oxygen would be compressed into the cylinder, and if you paid attention in any chemistry class, you'd know that hydrogen is very flammable, as the Hindenburg found out firsthand. Oxygen, while not flammable, typically makes fire bigger, so if you compress the two gases together and ignite them, you're gonna end up making a big kablooey. All that air pressure needs somewhere to go, so it all rushes to the path of least resistance, which happens to be the end of this cannon tip here. It's essentially a giant potato gun, but instead of a potato, it's a giant air bullet. But how much harm could that really do? Well, during tests, the cannon was impressively able to destroy a stationary 1-inch thick board over 650 feet, or 260 Alaskan king salmon, away. So it didn't really do much. It proved even more useless against moving aircraft which fly several thousand feet high. You'd honestly have better luck just hucking rocks at the dang things. The cannon was only ever used in warfare once when it was installed on a bridge, and it didn't yield any significant results, which is why it's in this video. Look at it. Look how dumb it is. Even the Soviets were in on the whole experimental weapons thing in World War II. Everyone was really out there trying new things and seeing what stuck. Take, for example, tanks. Tanks are good. They drive around on the ground and shoot shit, right? Well, what if they could also fly? No, not like an airplane. Well, actually, yes, like an airplane, but only to make it to the battlefield quickly to drive around on the ground and shoot shit. Previously, tanks were haphazardly airdropped with their crew dropped separately, and that's just too slow for warfare. Enter the Antonov A-40 flying tank. It's a tank strapped to a glider. The operating principle is that these bad boys would already have their crew aboard while a bigger plane does the heavy lifting. Once approaching the battlefield, the plane would just dump its load, releasing the glider to the ground below. Once landing safely, the wings could be dropped and the tank could ride right into the heat of battle. The tank used in the experiment was the Soviet T-60, a rather small light tank typically used for scouting. But despite being classified as a light tank, the thing still weighed almost 6 metric tons, or just over 13,000 pounds. So it was far from light. But how is this thing gonna fly, you might ask? The answer is Not well. In order to lighten the load and reduce drag, the tank's secondary guns were removed, headlights and peripherals were stripped, and ammo and fuel were kept to a minimum, rendering it almost useless. In the end, only one T-60 tank was ever equipped with the glider wings and dropped. When it was tested, the tank landed rather roughly and 180'd back to base almost immediately. Those overseeing the project were all, this tank cannot fly good. And the project was immediately abandoned. Alright, there you have it. A bunch of
Don't forget the gun.
Wait, what?
Don't forget the gun.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've got one bonus for you. Roll it. As an honorable mention, we have the Krummlauf, which will certainly make you laugh your ass off. This is a German weapon attachment used to theoretically shoot around corners. But would you be surprised if I told you it was extremely ineffective? The barrels would only get through a few hundred rounds before just destroying itself. Not to mention that the bullets would be shattered into fragments upon exiting this curved monstrosity. Imagine the last thing you see being a weird curved pipe coming around a corner before your melon just gets converted into jelly jam by Hans's Looney Tune-ass gun. I'd be pretty irate, not that my face could express it.
Richest pirates in history. Yarr. Blackbeard, probably the most notorious pirate in history, surprisingly ranks poorest among the wealthy pirates on this list, though he still made bank. Before the beard, he was known as Edward Teach, a small English chap born around the 1600s. History's forgotten the exact year, so we'll just go with it. In the same sense, not much is known about Little Eddie before he got his first facial pube, so let's fast forward a bit. In the early 1700s, the Caribbean was really going through it as the English, the French, and the Spanish duked it out for territorial control and dominance over trade routes in and around the Americas. One side effect of this conflict was the hiring of privately owned ships to attack and capture other ships. It was like a big game of rock, paper, scissors, but it was just guns, guns, guns. These private guns for hire were called privateers and were given written permission from their respective crowns to plunder and pillage any and all enemy ships to their liking. After all was said and done and the three crowns made peace in 1712, these privateers, who were used to being able to just ransack whoever they wanted to for all they were worth, were now out of a job. Oh. Well, legally speaking anyway. In fact, most privateers just kept up their shooting shiny ship shenanigans without a shadow of shame. And this is where the golden age of piracy began to peak and where most of these salty dogs made their fortunes. Eddie Teach was one such a privateer, having served under the English crown during Queen Anne's War in his youth. Around 1716, Eddie Spaghetti took an opportunity to make his fortune, joining a crew under renowned English pirate Benjamin Hornigold. After Teach had seized several small enemy ships and proved his worth, Hornigold was all, nice. And Teach was given more command. Eventually, Hornigold was ousted as captain after his refusal to attack fellow English ships that were just brimming and throbbing with gold. He was given a full pardon from the English crown and retired in peace. Teach was elected as the new captain and was thrilled at the new venture, as he could now do things his own way. Almost immediately after his promotion, the crew had captured the ironically named French ship La Concorde, meaning harmony in English. Now sure, one can expect a few casualties when a ship is absolutely reamed from both sides with cannon fire, but this was a slave ship, and this is how slave ships were packed. Surrendering immediately, the ship was taken and any surviving slaves were set free on a nearby island, to be recaptured later.
Okay.
The brand spanking new vessel was given a makeover, having 40 cannons slapped right on that thing. The ship was repurposed as Teach's flagship and renamed to the Queen Anne's Revenge. Now an absolute powerhouse, Teach took to the seas to seek his fortune. His most prominent tactic, of course, was intimidation. Not only did he have a brand new ship well equipped to rip any opposing vessel 40 new assholes, but his menacing appearance alone would surely make you pucker your own in fear. As his nickname implies, Blackbeard had a long, jet black beard entwined with various lit fuses. This gave him a terrifying demonic look, which was quickly offset by the smell of burning hair. But if you were sailing your sloop and saw this coming up in your rearview mirror, you just about shit a brick. For a couple years, Blackbeard terrorized the Carolinas, seizing ships and taking hostages. But across the Atlantic, English King Gentleman Dude George I was kind of getting sick of pirates. He offered free pardons to anyone willing to throw in the smelly towel and a free rope necklace to anyone that didn't. Blackbeard took the offer, but fell right back into piracy when the opportunity presented itself, which was immediately. Well, the governor of Virginia took matters into his own hands and assembled a team of pirate hunters to cut down the callous captain.
In the wee hours of the morning on November 22nd, 1718, Blackbeard was ambushed by the Royal Navy, and his crew was slaughtered. Blackbeard himself sustained 20 stab wounds and 5 gunshot wounds. Although short-lived, Blackbeard's notorious pirate career amassed a pretty penny. It's estimated that his plundering racked up about $240,000, or about $18.5 million, adjusted for inflation in 2025. In the end, Blackbeard's head was severed and his body disrespectfully dunked in the drink. His melon was mounted as a warning to any and all future pirates, but an invitation to some. Born in the American colony of Massachusetts, Captain John Halsey began his sailing career as a privateer for the English crown in 1704. He started off by preying on French fishing fleets in the North Atlantic, but eventually preferred attacking Spanish ships near the Canary Islands off the coast of West Africa. This didn't last long, as his letter of marque, the English monarchy's permission slip to raid enemy ships, expired the very next year. Unable to legally loot and plunder, Captain Halsey turned to piracy and sailed further east into the Indian Ocean. The goal here was to intercept Mughal Empire treasure ships, but after several months of sailing around with no booty to show for it, crew morale was at an all-time low. This led to the aggravated crew jumping at any opportunity to score some simoleons. One day, a Dutch ship passed by Halsey and his crew, looking very vulnerable. Halsey, unwilling to attack and anger any European powers, shrugged it off and just kept chugging along. This elevated crew status from peeved to pissed, and Halsey was voted out of office. Which is something the pirates did. If they felt like the guy in charge just wasn't up to snuff, they could just vote him out democratically. Or metallically, depending on the crew. Halsey was metaphorically stripped of his captain duties, and the crew took it upon themselves to attack the Dutch ship, expecting it to be some pushover merchant equipped with nothing more than a single-shot pistol and a few why I oughtas. Turns out, not so. The Dutch ship, in fact, had several large cannons and a surplus of why I oughtas. The Dutch fired a warning shot at the approaching crew, and it was well received. The rogue cannonball managed to slightly injure the guy at the helm and took out a few armaments at the same time. The crew got the message and did a 540 out of there, immediately reinstating Halsey as captain with a collective, "my bad," which it kind of was. On the next trip to shore, Captain Halsey disbanded the crew and formed a new, less mutinous one. Still seeking his fortune, John Halsey found himself in the Red Sea in 1707, where he encountered not one, not two, but 5 heavily armed English warships. "What's the move, Captain?" "We move forward." "Sir, we're heavily outgunned and outmanned, don't you think?" Did I stutter? "Well, yeah, you kinda did." "I said, forward!" "Okay, damn, I spit in my face." Halsey and his crew stared down 5 massive warships, each one more English than the last. Seeing such a paltry crew, the English warships said frigate and inexplicably retreated. In the confusion, Halsey and his crew managed to capture 2 of the 5 warships before the rest completely buggered off. The crew returned to shore in 1708 to celebrate their well-deserved victory, but Halsey would never return to the sea. The 2 warships, along with their cash and cargo and various other small loot from Halsey's pirating career, are valued at around $19.4 million in today's money. It's just too bad that shortly after making port, all 3 of John Halsey's ships were ripped apart by a hurricane and sank. He lost his fortune, but at least he still had his health. Just kidding. He died of a fever shortly after the storm at the age of 45-ish. Sure, you can face 5 galleons strapped to the keel head on, but God forbid your body temperature goes up a few degrees. Yep, that Captain Morgan. The one responsible for many a college headache and morning walks of shame. But before he got a leg up on the rum business, he was quite the headache to the Spanish in the mid-1600s. Born Henry Morgan around 1635 in Wales, fate would bring this young fella to the Caribbean of all places. It's unknown exactly how he got there. He could have been part of an expedition, served as an apprentice, who knows. All we care about is that it's the 1660s and Morgan is now in the Caribbean, setting up his home base in Jamaica, which was recently captured by the English. Around this time, Jamaica was developing into a reputable trading hub, revving up its plantation business and seeing roughly 1,500 privateers spend their spoils on the local economy. Morgan sailed under English privateer Sir Christopher Mings as a captain, and together, the crew ransacked Spanish settlements in cities across the Caribbean and Central America. Jamaica did eventually come under threat of invasion from the smelly Spanish, so Captain Morgan was promoted to the much less marketable Admiral Morgan and was put in command of 12 ships and about 700 men. Through his letters of marque from the English crown, Morgan had permission to attack Spanish and Dutch vessels at sea.
The problem, though, is that ships hold significantly less goods for the stealing than, say, an entire town. Though he was not legally cleared to do so, Morgan began attacking Spanish strongholds between the years of 1667 and 1671. His exploits netted him millions in Spanish bribes to spare towns and cities, and by the time he attacked Panama City in 1671, Morgan had over 30 ships at his command and hundreds of crew members, by far the largest across the Spanish Main at the time. Now, in order to take down this Panama City where the gold coins gleam and the girls got titties, Morgan sent a well-armed and well-trained party of 300 men, which clashed against roughly 1,600 inexperienced Spanish soldiers. And to say that the Spanish got their shit slapped would be an understatement. The Spanish forces saw between 400 to 500 casualties, with Morgan only losing 15 men. Panama's governor, now cornered, decided that instead of allowing Morgan to take the city, he would instead burn it to the ground. After Morgan claimed his victory, the city erupted in flame as the surviving Spanish troops set fire to the city. The blaze lasted until the next day, where Morgan and his crew plundered whatever goods weren't burnt to a complete crisp. They burnt the spices. They burned the gold. They burned me. Since what he did was technically illegal, Morgan was arrested but was never charged with any crime, and was instead formally knighted for his undying loyalty to the English crown. He did make his way back to Jamaica and served in a government role with the goal of eradicating piracy from the Caribbean waters, but he eventually fell out of power and fell onto the bottle, becoming a depressed alcoholic. In his final years, Morgan made sizable investments in plantations, owning 3 along with 131 slaves to work them. On August 25th, 1688, Henry Morgan died of complications from his heavy drinking at the age of 52. Across his very successful pirating career, Morgan's total captured booty is estimated to be worth around $19.6 million, adjusted for inflation. Although he died a drunk, his spirit lives on in your local alcohol store as an ironic proof of his spicy exploits. Remember to pour one out for the captain, who was really an admiral. Jean Fleury's story is one of luck rather than tactic. This time, we're gonna jump back to the 1520s, right about the time that Hernán Cortés had finished steamrolling the Aztec Empire. With seemingly endless spoils for the Spanish crown, Cortés sent 3 loaded treasure galleons back to Spain, and they almost made it back home. Almost. Enter Jean Fleury, a French privateer on the lookout for any Spanish ships who need a sinking. Stationed in Portugal during the 4 Years' War, which pitted France against the Holy Roman Empire, as well as Spain, Jean Fleury was in the perfect position to intercept Spanish and trade resupply ships. In early 1522, the 3 Spanish treasure galleons with gold blowing out their poop decks were spotted on the horizon, on the home stretch to Spain. Jean saw the small Spanish fleet and said, "No way, Jose," but in French. Fleury unleashed a flurry of cannons and quickly overtook 2 of the 3 ships before they could reach safer waters. Content with capturing the ships, Jean had no idea what he had stumbled upon. Below deck, the ship's holds were crammed and jammed with mountains of stereotypical pirate treasure, stacks of glistening gold, glittering jewels, exotic animals, and various rarities for the taking. Jean Fleury hit the jackpot, and with the score of a lifetime, he could have retired as a wealthy man. But that's for quitters, and real men know that the grind never stops. With knowledge of Spain's incredibly stacked ships, Fleury set out with his own fleet to try his luck at chasing that high. He and his crew managed to capture over 30 Spanish ships within the year, but couldn't find a fortune like the one before. The Spanish just about had enough of the Frenchmen and eventually captured, tried, and hanged the greedy little bastard in 1527. Fleury's amassed wealth was heavily carried by his first score, but nonetheless, his pirating career netted him about $47.1 million. But as Fleury found out, you can't take it with you. Big Black Bart was one of, if not the most successful pirate during the golden age of piracy in terms of vessels captured. The first detailed records of Black Bart, aka Bartholomew Roberts, dates back to 1719 when he was the second mate on a slave ship stationed off the Gold Coast of West Africa. It was here that the ship was captured by Welsh captain Howell Davis. Roberts and surviving members of the crew were forced to join Davis's ranks. But Davis found some value in Roberts, not only because he was a skilled navigator, but also a fellow Welshman. When you come across someone who speaks your native tongue, you're gonna bro it out, which is what happened.
Hello.
Davis and Roberts would have long conversations in their funny little language that none of the other sailors could understand. Through these little chit-chats, Davis convinced Roberts that, yo ho ho, a pirate's life was for him. Roberts was hesitant at first, but the idea grew on him when he realized that a life of piracy could, at best, lead to riches, and at worst, provide a short but adventurous life. Much better than being a wage slave to the man. Take that, capitalists. Instead, Roberts pulled himself up by his bootstraps and found a way to steal livelihoods away from hard-working folks. As such an inspirational captain, Roberts really looked up to Davis. But then Davis done got shot by the Portuguese. Roberts, recognized as a close companion to the now dead Davis, was elected as the new captain, much to the dismay of the Portuguese, who very quickly learned a demonstrative definition of the word revenge. Roberts, now in command, really fell into the role of a pirate captain. He began capturing ships left and right, and on an expedition to Brazil, encountered a large fleet of 42 Portuguese ships. Roberts was able to locate the richest ship in the fleet by using the simple tactic of asking nicely. And which one has the most gold on it? Oh, well, it's that one right over yonder. Oh, thanks. Roberts continued his successful spree of ship stealing for the next few years, with his crew growing fiercely loyal. To maintain order and morale, Roberts developed his own pirates code, a set of agreements and laws that would be upheld by every crew member, bringing law to lawless men. Roberts was also one of the early adopters of the infamous Jolly Roger's skull and crossbones black flag. Flying the Jolly Roger was a great way to tell your targets that shit was about to hit the fan should they choose to stay and fight. Most didn't. In fact, in 1720, Roberts and his crew made their way up to Newfoundland, entering a harbor with their black flags whipping in the wind. Any and all surrounding ships' crews abandoned their post and fled. Roberts took the town, 22 merchant ships, and 150 fishing vessels without firing a single shot. Across his entire piratical career, Roberts yoinked over 400 ships, making him the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. His plunder is valued in the ballpark of $48.2 million. His career was successful, but all good things must come to an end. On February 10th, 1722, a British Royal Navy ship ambushed Roberts and fired a volley of grape shot broadside. Grape shot, if you're unaware, were basically giant grenades, several small iron balls a few inches in diameter densely packed in a canister designed to take out enemy crewmen. Well, poor old Roberts caught a ball right in the throat as he stood on deck, killing him instantly. He was 39. As you can probably tell, active pirate careers were pretty short. Most died right when the getting was good. A simple rogue cannonball, splinter of wood, or a stray cough could cut down a pirate where he stood, and Captain Thomas II was no exception. Beginning his privateering career at the tail end of the 17th century, Tommy II was commissioned to ravage a French factory on the coast of West Africa. Sailing across the pond from Bermuda alongside one Captain George Dew, both men had a lot to do. But Mother Nature had other plans. Glad that wasn't us, right? Y'all want to be pirates? Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, sure. Yeah. I can hear you. Okay, yeah. Okay, yes. All right. I can hear you. I can hear. The two crews set sail for the Red Sea, an area chock full of wealthy ships seeping out of every orifice. Like that one. Tommy's first big score was an Indian sloop headed for the Ottoman Empire. The vessel was captured without much effort and was certainly one for the books. Hidden in the hold was millions of dollars worth of gold and silver, with millions more worth of spices, ivory, gemstones, spices, silks, and spices. Tommy II sailed to a pirate haven on Madagascar to divide the plunder before making his next move. Several months later, II grew a new crew and set sail to wreak havoc once again. It did not end well. While pursuing a 25-ship fleet leaving the Mughal Empire, II engaged one of the lagging ships. Said ship turned about to face his attacker and fired a volley of cannons. One of these cannonballs practically split II in two, disemboweling the captain and killing him instantly at the age of 44. Fuck! It is estimated that II's piracy career netted him over $151.9 million in captured goods. There is a lot to say about Sir Francis Drake, but this video is already getting long enough by my standards, so like an enthusiastic Tinder date, I'm gonna trim it up for you. Sir Francis Drake was an English explorer and privateer and one heck of a sailor, starting off as a humble seaman and eventually circumcising the globe. Well, that's not right. Oh, that's better. Very early on in his career, Drake grew an incessant hatred and distrust for any and all Spaniards. And now, before you think he's racist, it's because the Spanish wouldn't let him break into the West African slave trade. From then on, Drake vowed to attack any Spanish possessions he came across in the future, which he did. He started making good on this promise in 1572 by attacking Panama, a Spanish transfer site of silver and gold from the Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean Sea. Drake and his men raided the area. Despite getting shot in the leg, Drake made off with literal tons of precious metals, making him and his crew rich and famous practically overnight. It was also at this time that Drake became one of the first Englishmen to lay eyes on the Pacific Ocean, letting out an iconic English roar of excitement. Drake vowed that he would one day sail those waters in the future, which he did. Beginning in November of 1577, Drake was granted a fleet of 6 ships and set sail from Plymouth to... Trying again in December of 1577, Drake was granted a fleet of 6 ships and sailed from Plymouth to circle the globe, eventually limping back home in 1580. Along the way, however, Drake made it his mission to be as disruptive to the Spanish as possible. Just 1 year into the voyage, 6 ships were whittled down to just 1. Drake's flagship, the Golden Hind. Making it past the southernmost tip of Chile, Drake began bombarding the western coast of South America, ravaging Spanish towns and seizing Spanish ships, one of which was the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, which housed over 29 tons of silver bars, silver coins, gold, and jewels. Drake was so tickled pink by this score that he spared the captured ship's crew, even gifting them small amounts of the treasure as they went on their merry way. Fast forward 2 years and 1 global circumnavigation later, and Drake's back home in England. The Queen knights him and everyone briefly claps. He then did some boring political nonsense before hopping back on the saddle and obliterating the ever-loving fuck out of some Spaniards, just like the old days. Speaking of old days, those are the types of days that Drake woke up to in his mid-50s. Still clinging to his youth, the withering and dusty seaman returned to Spanish waters back to where it all started, attacking Panama. Sir Francis Drake died of dysentery in 1596 and was hucked into the ocean in a lead coffin. Across his 33 years of piracy against the Spanish, Drake accumulated upwards of $170.3 million in goods and gold. Last on our list is the one and only Black Sam. No, this one. Despite being known as the single wealthiest pirate in recorded history, his pirating career lasted little more than a year. Black Sam was a real pirate's pirate and was renowned for his exceptional generosity and mercy as he boarded your boat and stole all your shit. The so-called Prince of Pirates began his career as almost all pirates did, in the Navy. During his teen years, Sam both metaphorically and quite literally got his feet wet in a few naval battles before branching off to a treasure hunting crew. But when searching for sunken gold didn't pan out, Sam chose to do the next best thing, a life of piracy. He managed to join the crew of one Benjamin Hornigold. Remember him? He's the pirate captain that Blackbeard served under in his youth. Well, as a reminder, Hornigold refused to attack English ships, much to the dismay of his treasure-hungry crew. Hornigold and Blackbeard broke away from the majority of the crew to go do their own things, like retire and die, respectively. The remaining crew, however, now turned to Black Sam Bellamy for leadership, and he took the job. About a year later in 1717, while sailing near Cuba, Bellamy and the boys came across the Witta Galley, a state-of-the-art English slave ship practically begging to be captured, which it was. After giving chase for 3 whole days, Bellamy was finally in range to fire a volley, and after the first shot, the captain of the Witta surrendered. On the ship was a fortune in gold, ivory, and various precious luxuries freshly gathered from the sale of over 300 slaves. The Witta was re-engineered into a flagship, being upgraded with more firepower for intimidation purposes, as Bellamy often captured ships with little destruction. It was also common that he would spare his captives, allowing them to flee on the very ships he captured, minus any goods of course. Can't make a profit on charity. His kind and reasonable demeanor granted him a very loyal crew, and it seemed like Sam had everything going for him. But fate had another idea. Just 2 months after the score of a lifetime, Bellamy sailed from the Spanish Main to the American Main. At around midnight on April 26, 1717, the Witta Galley was caught in a strong nor'easter storm and was quickly capsized and sank several hundred feet off the coast of Cape Cod. Bellamy and all but 2 of his 146 crewmen went down with the ship. Guys, In 1984, however, 267 years after its demise, the wreck of the Witta Galley was discovered, including Sam's treasure. Several tons of gold, silver, and gems were recovered from the site, as well as some human remains encased in debris. And these are suspected to be Bellamy's, though that is yet to be confirmed. Bellamy's exploits earned him a modern-day equivalent of over $177.5 million. That's about 0.045% of Elon Musk's net worth as of me writing this. Guess Sam should have worked harder.
Before the 1900s or so, doctors were kind of just taking shots in the dark as to how to cure their patients. Have asthma? Eat a bunch of boiled carrots. Severe fever? Pray to your Lord and Savior at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Eye irritation? Cut off the eyes of a crab and rub them on the back of your neck. It will never fail to amaze me the wild cures that medical professionals had back then. But to be fair, they were the ones at the forefront of modernizing medicine. They were the ones just trying to iron out the kinks of how everything actually worked through arduous trial and error. Today, I'm going to share with you 5 medical treatments that will make you go, that's pretty stupid. And the list starts off pretty strong. Tobacco enemas were all the rage in the 17 and 1800s and were used as a resuscitation method, like almost the exact opposite of CPR today. Back then, tobacco was thought as a sort of cure-all, capable of warming the human body and ridding it of all toxins. There's a story in 1746 about a man who pulled his wife from a body of water. Even though she appeared to have drowned, a passing sailor spotted the troubled couple. "Fear not, good sir," said the sailor. "I know just the cure. Here, take my pipe. Now, what you're gonna want to do is ever so delicately jam it up your wife's blowhole. Yeah, just right up in there. Then blow like the eastern wind in a galleon sails." The man reluctantly complied, inserted, and blew hard on the pipe. The story has a happy ending because the woman actually managed to survive somehow. Crazy, right? Yeah, I thought whoever wrote the story was just blowing smoke up my ass. Tobacco enemas continued to be popular for treatments of symptoms like headaches or abdominal cramping up until the 1900s, when doctors realized that was a bad idea since tobacco is carcinogenic. Speaking of headaches, they've existed for long as humans have had heads, which is to say a long while. If you've ever had a pounding headache, you probably wish you could just open up a hole in your skull to relieve the pain. Well, guess what our ancestors used to do? Yeah, there was a process called trepanation, which is actually the world's oldest known form of surgery, dating back some 6,000 years ago during the Neolithic era, the last part of the Stone Age. This procedure was typically performed on individuals who had symptoms ranging from headaches, head injuries, seizures, mental illness, really anything to do with your noggin. Not only were the holes believed to relieve head pressure, but to also release evil spirits crammed in there. So imagine Dr. Unga and Nurse Bunga delicately whacking at your melon with a rock because you decided to be extra silly that day. Speaking of silly, let's talk about an Italian chemist named Angelo Mariani. At the age of 25, he developed a miracle elixir that would aid in the curing of rather minute symptoms such as exhaustion, tummy aches, depression, and anxiety. By simply mixing a bold and flavorful Bordeaux wine with equally bold cocaine, you too can be fit as a fiddle. The drink became so popular in France that it was marketed overseas in the United States, where it inspired John Pemberton to put his own spin on the wine mixture. That is until the United States banned alcohol. But Johnny Boy wouldn't give up so easily. He created a carbonated alcohol-free alternative which still possessed the full Coke power. Speaking of putting your own spin on something, our next treatment does just that. Looking like a rejected nightmarish amusement park thrill ride, we have the whirling chair. The method behind this absolute unit of a contraption in the 1800s was to treat patients with mental illnesses like schizophrenia by completely scrambling their fucking brains into soup. Patients were strapped into the chair where an operator would then begin rotating it on a very tight axis, spinning faster and faster until the patient completely passed out. Which is beneficial because you can't be crazy while unconscious. Of course, losing consciousness in that fashion is due to the brain not getting enough oxygenated blood, which in fact will cause more brain damage. But hey, at least it looked kind of fun. Speaking of having fun, our last treatment requires me to address my male audience, which is probably most of you. Have you ever had difficulty performing for your partner? Can't quite satisfy that significant other in your life? Can't produce an offspring to call your own? Boy, do I have the remedy for you. Introducing goat nads. Yeah, they're just a goat's balls, but they could be your balls. Have you ever watched a goat fuck? I haven't, but I bet they would perform better than you, dork. This is probably the type of sales pitch that John Brinkley gave to his patients in the early 1900s. The man was a self-proclaimed doctor whose claim to fame was replacing vulnerable men's vulnerables with goat nuts. His process was not well defined and was often improvised on the spot, just Kobeing some goaty gonads into a patient's newly emptied sack. Sometimes he would replace them, but sometimes he might even just place the goat balls in there next to the current ones and call it a day. He had over 40 patients die on his table or from infection shortly after. Those who did survive experienced a placebo effect because no work had actually been done on their existing dangly bits. Those were the lucky ones. John Brinkley ended up making millions on the fraudulent procedure over 2 decades, but he claimed he was doing the impotent men a favor. You can also do me a favor by doing the thing and the stuff.
What better accomplishment can there be than living for eternity? Seeing civilization thrive, endless investing, watching your loved ones slowly decay around you? Yeah, immortality seems pretty great, and a lot of people throughout history thought so too. They spend years of their temporary stay on Earth attempting to make it a little bit more permanent. So let's take a look at how people have attempted to extend their normal lifespan. When you think of mummies, the first thing that probably comes to mind is ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were often mummified after their deaths, preserving their remains well beyond their normal decaying timeline. But what if they began mummifying themselves while they were alive? Well, that's what a small sect of Japanese Buddhism used to practice. Motivations for doing so can vary from selfless acts of sacrifice to protect others, or just to achieve spiritual ascension and be worshipped for all eternity. Those brave enough to take on the process, known as Soku Shimbotsu, start off by quite literally eating trees. The diet, called mokujiki, or tree eating, limited practitioners to nutritional staples such as nuts, berries, tree bark, and even tree resin. Just deep throat an entire cherry blossom down to the roots and call it a day. After 2,000 days of the strict diet, the monk would be encased in a tomb with holes poked in it for air like they were a pet hamster about to be absolutely manhandled by a toddler. They were also supplied with a bell which they would ring daily to tell everyone, nope, still not a mummy yet. They would spend their days reciting prayers and munching on their tree skits, slowly taking on the form of a hearty beef jerky. Once the bell stopped ringing, it was showtime. The tomb would be completely sealed for 1,000 days just to be extra sure things would go right. Afterward, the tomb would be opened to see if the monk was successful or not. At worst, they rotted away into a neighborhood favorite Halloween prop. And at best, they gained the ability to give Link cool Sheikah Slate upgrades. Since blood is the life fluid that we all have pumping around our big hulking meat sacks, why not frequently change it out like you would your car's oil? Surely it needs to be refreshed every once in a while. Out with the old, in with the new. That was Soviet physician Alexander Bogdanov's theory anyway. He saw blood transfusion as a therapeutic stimulant and wanted to test out its benefits firsthand. After abandoning politics in 1924 because Soviet Russia's communism wasn't communisming enough, Alex finally had the time to get around to some good old blood swapping. He took a deep dive into blood experimentation in hopes of unlocking eternal youth, or at least extending the normal human lifespan. Blood transfusions nowadays are one-sided. A needy patient receives blood from a healthy donor, and that's that. Alex, on the other hand, treated blood transfusions as more of an equivalent exchange versus a one-way donation. Two willing participants would trade out about a liter of blood to each other. The theory was that the participants would inherit each other's strengths. An older person would inherit youth from a younger partner, who would in turn get a +5 on all future wisdom rolls.
Hey bro, you wanna swap blood?
Well, what can you deadlift?
400 pounds.
Sold.
Bogdanov himself participated in 11 of his own transfusion experiments. After receiving the blood, he noted how he felt rejuvenated, regained eyesight, slowed his baldness, and increased his daily rub-out limit to 3. It looked like Bogdanov was well on his way to attaining immortality. But like the story of Icarus, he just couldn't push that boulder up the mountain. Or something. I don't read Greek mythology. After his 12th transfusion with a less than ideal partner who may or may not have been infected with malaria and tuberculosis, he somehow became very sick and died in 1928. No, this isn't slamming down several cold ones while in a Lamb of God wall of death. Instead, we will take a trip back to Imperial China when the first emperor reigned. Qin Shi Huang declared himself emperor of unified China once he thoroughly convinced the other 6 Chinese states to bend to his will. Hey guys, you want to become a unified China?
No, we're good.
I think I'm fine.
No,
Maybe later? Okay.
How about now? Yay!
As a bonus, his military strengths translated well into leadership qualities. Under his rule, he standardized many aspects of normal life. Currency, units of measurement, language, and laws were now universal across a unified China. He created networks of new roads, canals, and irrigation systems, allowing trade to flourish. In order to protect his new kingdom like a proud dad, he tied his New Balances tight and ordered the construction of a great big beautiful defensive wall that would be admired for millennia. After all, he made the bold claim that his kingdom would reign for more than 10,000 generations after him. Now, while Huang sounds pretty neat, he was a bit of a dick. He taxed the balls off of poor people, had historic and cultural documents burned, and executed anyone who went against his ideas. In doing so, he became isolated and hated. He was also completely bonked out of his gourd, lusting for eternal power and life, sending alchemists away on expeditions in search of the legendary elixir of life, even sometimes joining their journeys himself. His alchemical friends would frequently offer him potions and concoctions with the promise that they would at least extend his health bar a little bit while they searched for the elixir. Problem was, these potions contained mercury, a highly toxic liquid metal. But let's be honest, if you handed someone who is desperate for eternal life a bottle of stuff that looks like this, they're gonna go, "Oh, hell yeah!" and toss it back faster than you can say, "Wait, don't drink that." Emperor Qinshu Huang died at the ripe old age of 49, a few infinities short of his goal. Oh, and his empire collapsed a few years later. If you've ever wanted to treat your body like some bad leftovers, then look no further than cryonics, the scientific technique of freezing your body in extremely low temperatures. Don't you mean cryogenics, I hear you ask? No, cryogenics is just the process of producing low temperatures. This is cryonics. Anyway, the theory is that you freeze your body and brain in temperatures low enough to halt all deterioration. The hope is that one day you can be thawed out and just resume your life as if nothing ever happened. There was a guy born in Belgium in 1930 by the name of, who was a bit of a visionary. He would often speculate on how humans would innovate technology as time went on, being able to eventually solve any problem, including death. He also thought that modern politics were wasteful and outdated, that the only people who really exist are those who look to the future for change, or those who stay in the past and cling to tradition. Speaking of tradition, he also believed that traditional names were stupid. So he changed his own to FM 2030, much easier to pronounce. Besides sounding like a child of Elon Musk, FM's name change highlighted his goal of celebrating his 100th birthday in the year 2030. He believed that by then, humanity will be ageless, everyone will have an opportunity to live forever, and world peace will finally be attained. Good one. Unfortunately for him, his pancreas clung to the tradition of failing, and so he died in 2000 at the age of nice. To keep his dream alive now that everything else was dead, his remains were placed in a cryonic suspension in Arizona by the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, where they still exist today. Of course, it has to be said that there's no existing scientific evidence to suggest that cryopreservation can even be successful. The practice is often regarded as pseudoscience and a scam. Since clients are required to be legally dead and slammed full of antifreeze, it's impossible to resuscitate them. Like FM, hundreds of people have either had their remains cryopreserved or have made arrangements to do so after death. Even American superstar Jeffrey Epstein wanted his head and wiener frozen for future mischief, but we all know how that turned out. The gamble here is if the companies performing the storage will even be in business long enough to carry out their end of the bargain. Cryopreservation has been a thing since the 60s and 70s, but most of those companies went bankrupt, so their inventory of bodies were gently thawed and respectfully disposed of. Dr. Charles Brown Sequard was highly regarded by his peers in the medical community. He was a pioneer of sensory experiments on the spinal cord, as well as in-depth studies on the nervous system. But he was a bit off in some ways. He often performed radical experiments on himself, which would raise questions about his sanity. For example, when trying to figure out the cure for cholera, he wanted to determine how the disease was spread. When observing a cholera patient violently vomiting, he decided to catch the vomit in his own mouth and swallowed it. As is typical with aging, Charles found himself losing strength and stamina by age 72. Well, he took that personally and tried to find a way to regain his youth. After countless animal experimentations, he came up with a serum. one made from crushed up dog and guinea pig testicles mixed with blood. He injected himself with this serum and noted how he was able to lift heavier weight, and even his pee stream was stronger, which is a pretty great benchmark to measure improvement. When presenting his findings to his colleagues, they were all,
Are you serious, dude?
His reputation was thrown into the toilet, and he quickly became a laughingstock of the medical community. Looking back, it is likely that the serum that Charles injected contained a small amount of testosterone, which is why he experienced some positive results. Even though he was dismissed by his peers, he still offered the therapy to aging men wishing to regain and retain youth. Thousands of men were reported to have tried the serum, with some claiming the same effect as Charles, though it is now likely to have simply been a placebo effect. Charles died 4 years later at age 76. So, that's just a few examples of how people have tried to attain immortality. No reported cases of success yet, but we can keep on trying. Remember that life isn't really about how much time you have, it's about how you spend it. And you don't want to be on your deathbed regretting not watching more chat history, do you? Do you?
Embarrassing royal deaths. At just 6 years old, itty-bitty Jimmy II of Scotland was an excited little prince eager to one day inherit the throne from his dear old dad, King James I. And it looks like that day is today.
Dad?
James I was a victim of a coup conducted by his power-hungry uncle who sought to seize the throne. His wife, the Queen, was injured but managed to survive despite being an intended target. Although certainly shaken, she stirred up quite the outcry from her Scottish subjects by putting her now very dead husband's corpse on display, and seeing the sheer brutality that had occurred, an all-out manhunt began for the men responsible. And these men were captured and brutally executed. With the old king gone, it was time to crown a new one. Being only 6 at the time of his dad's dastardly demise, Slimmy Jimmy Jr. was crowned on March 27, 1437. But since he couldn't make any sound decisions as a drooling youth, his still-alive mom took power as regent, acting as ruler on James's behalf. But therein lies the problem. See, the people of Scotland are what we call Scottish. The Queen, now ruling over Scotland, hailed from England. You see the problem here. She was promptly pushed from power in favor of someone a bit more Scottish. Bursting through the door is Archibald Douglas. He's the king's much older first cousin. He took the job but died a few years later from a fever since there wasn't a cowbell in sight. Power was then passed to these two fine fellows, Lord William Crichton and Sir Alexander Livingston. Their goal was to keep King James safe and in power, but in such a hostile political environment, with all of these seemingly random people trying to do their best to position themselves into more power, sometimes it takes a bit of violence to achieve those goals. The best example of said violence being the infamous Black Dinner. In 1440, Lord Crichton and Sir Livingston held a royal dinner at Edinburgh Castle, where the king resided. At the top of the invite list were 16-year-old William Douglas and his 10-year-old brother, David Douglas. They were the sons of former fever-haver Archibald Douglas and a threat to the crown. While downing a hock of ham and a bushel of apples, or whatever they ate in those times, the brothers would soon learn that this dinner would come with a show. In the middle of the meal, a decapitated black bull's head was aggressively slammed onto the table in front of them. Ooh, dessert. Now, apparently having a black bull's bulbous block brutally bashed onto your beautiful buffet was a Scottish nobleman's friendly gesture of impending doom. Despite the young King James's pleas, the two boys were captured and beheaded right in front of him. Hardly appetizing. This historical power move was the direct inspiration for that red wedding scene in the Game of Thrones. Fast forward through a few years of childhood trauma to 1449, and the now 19-year-old James marries a nice lady named Mary, and she shoots out 7 kids. One of them dies. Very sad, but very typical. With his marriage and coming of age, James's kingship switched from free trial to premium access. However, what was left of those dang Douglases are still fighting to retain power. If only there was a way for a king to take care of such an annoyance. Yeah, that works. James eventually wiped the Douglases from power and yoinked their land, and he was now in full control of his kingdom. Despite looking super spooky with his villainous vermilion birthmark covering half of his face like that one Avatar guy, I don't know his name, I never watched it, James was a very successful king. He was super social with commoners and advocated for advances in education, helping found the University of Glasgow in 1451. James was also a huge proponent of modern war technology, which at the time happened to be war cannons. These engineering marvels of bronze and iron were critical in besieging forts and castles, as cannonballs would just chew right through them things. While attempting to capture Roxburgh Castle, one of the last Scottish castles still under smelly English control after the Scottish Independence Wars, King James II positioned himself next to one of his prized cannons, and after a few words of encouragement to his bombardment buddy, the king gave the order. Artillery! The mounted metal menace exploded, killing King James II instantly at the age of 29. This rather unfortunate death was cemented in Scottish lore on August 3, 1460, and is officially, well, canon. In the middle of the Capetian dynasty, the Kingdom of France was ruled by this guy, Louis VI, also known as Louis the Fat, which is just mean. He should be called Louis the Body Positive. Anyway, this big fat asshole had 8 kids, and this chapter is all about his eldest son, Philip.
Call me Phil.
As was tradition in the Capetian dynasty to establish a clear lineage to the throne, young Philip was crowned as co-king of the Franks at the tender age of 13, right about the time when teen angst starts kicking in. Although reportedly Louis's favorite child, Philip was a bit of a stinker. He would refuse to listen to his father's authority, fail to pay attention to any of the king's lectures and set standards for being a king, and devolved into being a disobedient little shithead, as kids tend to be. According to Walter Mapp, a historic writer during that time period, the continued arrogance and insubordination of the spry little king made him, quote, a burden to all. You know, like when you see a small child convulsing on the floor of your local Target because a 36-year-old man-child snatched the last Pokemon Prismatic Evolutions booster pack out of their clammy little ham hands while the parent just looked on in a dead stare? Hang in there, man. Even though a troublesome youth, the problem would soon fix itself. In October of 1131, at age 15, young King Philip was chilling with the bros, racing through the streets on their 1-horsepower tricked-out Mustangs, when everything was turned on its head. A small sable swine scuttled into the street, right in the path of the oncoming prince and his gang. Philip, who was leading the group, was catapulted off of his horse after it had tripped over the surprise pig. Prince Philip slammed into the ground in a devastating crack and crunch of bone, fracturing all of his limbs and being rendered unconscious. Tragically, the young king had succumbed to his wounds the very next day. King Louis and his family were stricken with immense grief over the loss of their son. The little piggy went to market, but it should have stayed home. George II, King of Great Britain, began life as a tiny little bratwurst in Hanover, Germany in 1683. His father, also George, was the first king of the Hanoverian era and a rather combative parent. Neither George liked the other and would always get into very heated and very public arguments over stuff like politics and other king things. But to be a little more specific, small George despised his dad's advisor, Robert Walpole, the guy considered to be the first British Prime Minister and the one who was really pulling all of the political strings behind the scenes. Think Wizard of Oz, but with a smaller head and worse teeth. But one day, enough was enough. Big George banished Little George from the king's palace after a falling out. The prince was pretty okay with this. He and his wife lived in peace and quiet for quite a few years until, well, the king died. Time to go be a king. Prince George achieved his kingship in 1727 at the age of 43. Views of his reign as king were mixed. Despite squashing political uprisings, expanding the arts, laying the foundations for the Industrial Revolution, and overseeing many successful military conflicts, including leading his troops into battle himself at the age of 60, his English subjects just couldn't get over the fact that he was German, so, you know, they were biased. Growing into his golden years, age started to really take a toll on the king. By 1760, King George II was 76, blind in one eye and hard of hearing. In the wee hours of October 25th, the rather fermented monarch rose from his bed, drank his iconic 6 a.m. hot chocolate, and excused himself to the loo to force out his own hot chocolate. But it was here on his cushy secondary throne that things took a turn for the worse. A servant stationed outside of the royal chambers heard a loud crash and comedically tore the door open to find the root of the commotion. What he found was the king on the floor, seemingly having just finished his business. George was lifted onto his bed and tended to by his physician, but his body crapped out on him. The king was dead. An autopsy of the royal remains indicated that the king had died as a result of a thoracic aortic dissection, the first reported case in history. See that tear right there in the aorta, the big artery leading into his heartery? Yeah, that's not supposed to be there. But how it happened is the question. And it is believed that the blood pressure required to cause such a rupture on an old man's already weakened heart came from a rather forceful push of the pelvic floor muscles. So, in an attempt to relieve himself of his intestinal burden, the king relieved himself of this mortal coil. Remember to stay hydrated. In a time where kings were given rather displeasing titles such as the Terrible or the Bad or the Slobberer, Martin of Aragon was granted the title of Martin the Humane. The gracious nickname was a testament to his kind and caring nature. He basically earned it by being a bit less murdery than any other kings at the time. I mean, all the guy did was reconquer Sardinia, suppress revolts, and led crusades against the Moors in northern Africa. But other than that, he was a perfect little angel, focusing on internal stability within his own kingdom of Aragon. But times of peace make for soft men. With little to no conflict to tend to in his later years, Martin grew older and wider. By 1410, at age 53, the king was rather rotund, wrinkled, and in a risky state of health, both physically and mentally. You see, his wife and his 4 children had died, leaving him all alone on his throne. He had married his distant and much younger cousin as a last-ditch effort to produce an heir, but with no success. The depressed and obese king had little more to live for, and would instead gorge himself in solitude. On one fateful night, the king had just downed a whole roasted goose by himself. Where does he put it all? If you've ever slammed down a large meal too quickly, you usually get some pretty bad indigestion, or as I like to call it, the ERP. Since this was the land before Tums, the king had to sleep off his discomfort. He lumbered up to his royal chambers and shimmied himself into his rather strong bed. To cheer himself up a bit, Martin clapped his greasy meat hooks together, summoning his court jester for some late night entertainment so he could hop aboard the train to Sleepytime Junction with a smile, even though he had no idea what a train even was. The jester apparently took his sweet time while being summoned, as he was asked about where he was the moment he entered the king's chambers. And this was when all hell broke loose.
What the heck took you so long?
Well, now hold on. I can't in good conscience let this play out with at least putting up a disclaimer. What you're about to hear is the joke that supposedly ended a nearly 300-year medieval dynasty. This is not for the faint of heart. You were warned. I was in the next vineyard, where I saw a young deer hanging by his tail from a tree, as if someone had so punished him for stealing figs. The king lost his absolute shit, reportedly slapping his belly in laughter for 3 hours straight, eventually falling out of his bed and collapsing on the ground where he lay dead from an apparent heart attack. With no heirs to assume the throne, the House of Barcelona, after ruling the crown of Aragon for 273 years, fell after the delivery of a single joke. Now, of course, historians debate if this story is even true, as some accounts have Martin dying of the plague, food poisoning, or complications from his weight. But those aren't nearly as funny. Archduke Alexander Leopold of Austria was a big dumb nerd. While the world of royalty focused on politics, land grabbing, and who could kill who more effectively, Alex instead played with his chemistry set in the corner, scribbling notes in a language called mathematics. It's no surprise that young Alex took a liking to the sciences, as his dad, Holy Roman Emperor Guy Leopold II, was a strong advocate for Enlightenment principles and the study of natural sciences.
Today's lesson is called gravity.
Whoa, gravity. But since he was still an emperor's son, involvement in politics was inevitable. Take, for instance, the Kingdom of Hungary. It wasn't officially part of the Holy Roman Empire, but it was somehow still ruled by it. There were governors in charge, but Emperor Leopold was all, here's my son. Make him do something. And thus, little Alex was elected into a lordship position known as a palatine. He had a pretty good time in that position, until the Jacobin conspiracy. A group of rebels were trying to have the Kingdom of Hungary break free from all Holy Roman Empire control, instead giving the royal crown to Alex. He very firmly said no, and the rebels were punished severely. With all of this political nonsense, Alex yearned for the simpler times of just mixing chemicals together to see what blows up. So in 1795, at the age of 22, Alex left Hungary for Vienna, Austria, and took up residence in Laxenburg Palace. But one summer, the young Archduke decided to turn up the heat and dabble in homemade pyrotechnics, a hobby that is famous for its safe and non-destructive nature. Expecting a visit from his cousin, Alex decided to rig up an extravagant fireworks display inside the palace. Hey, just cause you're educated doesn't mean you're smart. To be fair, he, along with a few servants, set up the show within a fortified armory called a casemate, with the intent of firing the rockets towards the outside. So it's not like he decided to just shove firecrackers into a kitchen cabinet for shits and gigs. He was a man of science after all. Nevertheless, all gunpowder and makeshift explosives were stored inside the fortified walls. When his cousin arrived, he attempted to fire off the first rocket, but since Mother Nature has great comedic timing, a rogue gust of wind blew the rocket over, launching itself into other explosives and gunpowder reserves. Everything exploded, engulfing the Archduke and his servants in a goodness gracious great ball of fire. Talk about going out with a bang, am I right? The title of king kinda just fell into the lap of old Adolf Frederick of Sweden in 1751. During the Age of Liberty, a time in history when the Swedish parliament was all... Adolf's rule as king was essentially worthless. He was no more than a political figurehead while all the real guys in fancy wigs did the ruling. But apparently not very well, because by the end of the Age of Liberty in 1772, Sweden was kind of worse for the wear. Its land ownership had diminished, trade had evaporated, and technological advancements were lagging. So Sweden was forced to sit back and watch its neighbors and rivals proudly wave around their large, throbbing economies. During King Adolf's lavishly lackadaisical leadership, nothing extraordinary happened.
The substandard sovereign did attempt to regain power, but failed to do so, because he sucked.
In fact, his entire reign is seen as a dull but peaceful lull in Swedish history with not much to show for it. And unfortunately for the king, the only exciting point in his life, at least from a historical perspective, was his death. According to some historical records, the rather indulgent king had overindulged himself on some food. On February 12, 1771, the king's last supper reportedly consisted of lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and champagne. Oh, and a few of these bad boys. This is a semla, a traditional Swedish sweet roll stuffed with almond paste and whipped cream, and hot damn does it look tasty. And that's exactly what the king thought as he inhaled 14 of them. Not surprisingly, all of that food did not sit well in the king's tummy, and all that internal stress is believed to have caused heart failure. The poor guy straight up ate himself to death. Now, before the actually crowd starts pounding away on their greasy keyboards, this tale of his death is regarded as propaganda and is highly discredited by modern historians. The official autopsy report for the king has survived all of these years and has concluded, based on all the evidence that they could gather from sleuthing around the king's insides, that his royal majesty had a stroke. Now, suffering from a stroke is rough, but for a king that wasn't up to par, it's a fair way to go. That's some golf humor for you.
Hey guys, today's topic's all about humanity's greatest achievement. Cheese. And unless you're lactose intolerant through genetic inferiority, there's really nothing like a good slice of cheese to brighten up your day. It comes in all kinds of flavors and textures too, like smooth, salty, and absolute garbage. But have you ever asked yourself, what is cheese? As appetizing as it sounds, cheese is just curdled milk. But which milk? Any milk really, assuming that you have a healthy and legal supply. And once you have your fresh, delicious, hair-free milk, just let it outright spoil. No way, you say, but yes way. Curds and whey. Curds are the gross little floating pieces at the top, and whey is the milk sweat that's left behind. Add in some flavors to your curds and voila, you have cheese. Of course, someone will say that the process is a little bit more complicated than that, and they'd be right, but this is a history video, so that begs the question, where did cheese even come from? Cheese is one of those inventions that was made by accident, like potato chips, Post-its, and you. According to official historic cheese lore, a merchant in ancient Europe or Asia or somewhere in this area stored milk for his travels in the best container he had at the time, a sheep's stomach. After a day of traveling in a hot desert, something magical happened. "Good golly, am I thirsty," says the merchant, wiping sweat off of his brow. "I can't wait to tear into this hot, delicious, refreshing milk." The merchant found that in addition to drinking his milk, which was now suspiciously salty, there were also some chunks to chew on as a snack, ruining the need for his provisions of Oreos. It turns out that the sheep's stomach contained rennet, an enzyme that delicately convinced the milk to change from a liquid to a solid. Word of this marvelous chewy milk spread far and wide, making cheese more popular than Jesus, who wouldn't exist for thousands of years. Earliest known evidence of cheese making dates back over 8,000 years in what is now Switzerland. I know, the Swiss making cheese, big shocker, right?
but more evidence has been found all across the world, from the country of Africa to the continent of Italy. Since food preservation techniques back then were nothing more than just salting and drying, cheeses were often salty and dry. It would be a long while before cheeses that we know would start popping up. Cheddar was invented around the 1100s, Parmesan in 1597, and Gouda a century later. In today's world, there are over 2,000 types of cheese, ranging from white American cheese to edible. Some countries even formed cheese boards, which provides a sort of patent on their cheeses, basically saying, hey, this is my cheese. Go make your own. Just like how champagne can't really be called champagne unless it's from the Champagne region in France, Parmesan or Parmigiano Reggiano can't be called as such unless it's from that particular region in Italy. Lucky for me, I can just pick it up at my local grocery store. Checkmate, Italy. All cheese types can be categorized into a basic system, organizing them based on their moisture content, like some kind of moist meter. First up, you have your fresh cheeses. These are your sloppiest mega wet cheeses like ricotta and mozzarella. Really good for making a nice calzone or some fresh Italian boba tea. Next up are the soft cheeses like Brie and Camembert. These cheeses are generally smooth and creamy and are good as spreads on like bread and stuff. Third are the semi-soft cheeses like Provolone and Munster, which aren't as soft as the soft cheeses, otherwise they would be classified as soft cheeses. These are good for some good-ass sandwich making. Fourth, we have the semi-firm cheese, or as I like to call them. Here you can find cheddar, Gouda, or Gruyere. Great for charcuterie parties and Lunchables for the kiddos. Finally, we have the fully erect hard cheeses like Parmesan and Asiago. Perfect for harassing your local Italian restaurant waitress, this grade is great for grating, and are typically your most flavorful cheeses as well as the most pungent. Just like gamers, the smellier it is, the better it is. It should be said that there is also a category of blue cheeses, for distinguished people who love the complex, bold, and sour flavors of actual mold. No matter the type of cheese you choose, culinary nerds will always tell you that you're not pairing it with the right complimentary food or drink in order to earn your first-class ticket to Flavortown. Look, if I want to shove a handful of shredded mozzarella down my throat at 2 in the morning, then let me. Don't recommend to me that I wash it down with a 2012 Sauvignon Blanc, because I did that, but it was a beer. Nowadays, cheese is still enjoyed as a staple of modern cuisine all across the world, but mainly in France where it is typically served sliced with fruit or bread after a main course. In the cultural hub that is the United States, we serve it as an appetizer, sliced in a sort of stick shape where it is then breaded and fried, providing key nutrients for us to grow big and strong. Remember that no matter how you slice it, cheese is a delicious addition to any meal, so feel free to eat it to your heart's content, until it fails from all of the excess sodium.